I am Liam, 28 years old. Exactly 1 month ago, my entire family threw a massive graduation party for my younger brother Caleb, and they deliberately, meticulously hid it from me. While I was sitting in a sweltering, unair-conditioned apartment, drowning in data models and fighting to secure my own future, my mother stood in front of our entire extended family and told them I refused to show up. She said I was too arrogant, too busy with a fake girlfriend, and that I simply didn't care about my own blood. They smiled, they posed for photos, and they celebrated my exclusion. But there is one massive detail they did not know. I was quietly securing a devastating amount of corporate leverage, and my grandmother, the sole controller of the family's generational wealth, was about to find out the absolute truth. And now, they are standing outside my high-security apartment door in the pouring rain, begging for a fraction of the power they tried to keep me from achieving. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my parents' toxic reputation piece by piece, hit the like button if you believe that true justice always finds a way. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from down in the comments. Now, let's go back to the sweltering Sunday afternoon where the match was finally lit. It was a completely ordinary Sunday afternoon, but I will remember the exact, suffocating temperature of that room for the rest of my life. The air conditioning unit in my cramped, overpriced one-bedroom apartment had been broken for 4 days. The humid, heavy summer air was pressing against the thin glass of my windows, trapping the heat inside. I was sitting at a scratched-up, second-hand dining table I had hauled up 3 flights of stairs myself, nursing a cracked ceramic mug of bitter, cheap instant coffee. My laptop screen was a blinding wall of endless rows of financial forecasting data, predictive algorithms, and risk assessment models for my master's thesis research. I had been staring at those numbers for 6 agonizing hours straight. My eyes were burning, my lower back was throbbing in protest, and my brain felt like it was operating through a thick layer of fog. I just needed a 10-minute break. I needed to look at something that wasn't a spreadsheet. I reached over the towering pile of printed research papers, grabbed my phone, and mindlessly opened social media. That single mundane action was the catalyst that would burn my entire family dynamic straight to the ground. Right at the absolute top of my feed was a post from my cousin Noah. The photograph was vibrant, bursting with bright afternoon sunshine, expensive decorations, and wide, perfectly practiced smiles. But it wasn't the smiles that caught my attention. It was the background. My stomach dropped violently. A cold, heavy sensation flooded my veins, making my breath catch sharply in my throat. I knew that backyard. I knew every single blade of grass in it. I had mowed that lawn 100 times as a teenager under the blazing sun while my brother sat inside playing video games. It was my parents' house. Strung up between the 2 massive oak trees that my grandfather had planted decades before his funeral, was a huge, custom-made vinyl banner. The bold, navy blue letters screamed across the fabric. "Congratulations, Caleb, class of 2026. I stared at the screen. My thumb was completely frozen over the glass. Couldn't swipe, couldn't look away. There were dozens of expensive metallic helium balloons tied to the freshly painted deck railing. There was a massive catered buffet set up with polished silver chafing dishes, the incredibly expensive kind my mother, Evelyn, only ever rented to impress the neighbors or when trying to network with local real estate developers. And then there was the crowd. My family, all of them. My father, Arthur, was standing right in the dead center of the frame. He was beaming, his face flushed with a pride I had never, not once, seen directed at me. He was holding a craft beer in one hand, while his other arm was draped heavily around my 24-year-old brother, Caleb. Caleb was wearing a brand new, sharply tailored designer polo shirt. He was holding up a generic, empty diploma cover for the camera, soaking in the absolute center of attention like a sponge, exactly the way he had his entire life. My mother, Evelyn, was standing on the other side of him. She was holding a massive, multi-tiered cake from the high-end boutique bakery downtown, a cake that easily cost more than my entire grocery and transportation budget for the entire month. I forced my thumb to move. I swiped to the next photo in the carousel. It was a wide shot of the yard. I saw my Aunt Clara laughing near the patio furniture. I saw Uncle Marcus holding a plate piled high with prime rib. I even saw older, distant relatives from 3 states over. People who hadn't made the drive down since the family gathered to discuss a messy divorce settlement 5 years ago. They had all driven out here. They had all booked hotel rooms. They had all RSVP'd. They had all gathered together to celebrate Caleb getting a generic communications degree that took him 6 years to finish. I looked at the tiny, gray timestamp on Noah's post. It read, "Yesterday. They had a massive, extended family gathering yesterday. I lived exactly 45 minutes away from that house. It was a straight, easy shot down the interstate. I didn't live across the country. I wasn't deployed overseas. I was less than an hour away, sitting in my miserable, hot apartment, eating ramen noodles to save money, and working myself to the bone on my thesis while my entire bloodline celebrated without me. Forgetting to invite me wasn't a logistical error. You don't just forget your eldest son when you are mailing out dozens of premium cardstock invitations, booking high-end caterers, and coordinating out-of-town guests. This was a calculated move. This was a deliberate surgical exclusion. I zoomed in on my mother's flawless, smiling face in the photograph. You know that highly specific, terrifying feeling when a truth you have been actively ignoring for your entire life finally smashes you square in the jaw? That was the exact moment for me. I didn't feel a sudden burst of screaming rage. I didn't want to throw my phone against the wall or smash my coffee mug. Instead, I just felt incredibly, profoundly tired. The kind of deep, ancestral exhaustion that seeps directly into your bones and turns your heart to stone. I set the phone down on the table, face up. I stood up, walked over to the tiny kitchen sink, turned on the cold tap, and splashed freezing water on my face. I gripped the edges of the cheap laminate counter and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes. I looked at the tension in my jaw. I realized, in that quiet, solitary moment, that I had spent 28 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was built specifically to keep me out. I dried my hands on a paper towel. I walked back to the dining table. I picked the phone back up. The screen glowed, illuminating the dark apartment. I tapped the screen and dialed my mother's number. I was about to confirm exactly what I already knew. The phone rang 3 times. Evelyn answered on the 4th ring. "Hello." Her voice was bright, musical, and perfectly cheerful. It was the voice she used when she thought a neighbor or a fellow HOA board member was calling. But underneath that practiced cheer, I could hear the immediate, forced, tight edge she always got when she realized it was me. She knew exactly who was calling, and I knew deep down she knew exactly why. "Hey, Mom," I said. I kept my voice completely flat, completely neutral. It took every ounce of discipline I had learned in the corporate world to keep the tremor out of my tone. I refused to give her the immense satisfaction of hearing me upset. I just saw Noah's pictures on Facebook. There was a heavy, suffocating pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched out for 5 agonizing seconds. I could hear the television playing a home improvement show softly in the background at her house. I could hear the distinct clinking of silverware being loaded into the dishwasher. She was cleaning up the remnants of a party I wasn't allowed to attend. "Oh," she finally said. Her tone shifted instantly, dropping the cheerful musical act entirely and replacing it with a thick, impenetrable layer of practiced defensiveness. "Yes, we did." "I see," I said, leaning back in my hard wooden chair. I stared at the ceiling. I must have missed my formal invitation in the mail. Or did it accidentally get routed to my email spam folder? I heard her let out a long, dramatic, suffering sigh. It was the exact same sigh she used when I was 10 years old and asked for a new pair of winter boots because mine were leaking freezing water. The sigh that was meticulously designed to make me feel like my very existence was an absolute, unmanageable burden on her life. "Liam, please don't do this right now," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Don't start drama. Your father and I we made a decision." A decision to not invite your oldest son to a family gathering that included relatives from 3 states away? I asked smoothly. I wasn't yelling. I was cross-examining her. We didn't want you stealing his moment, she blurted out, her voice rising in defensive anger. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear for a full second, staring at the glowing screen, genuinely wondering if I had suffered a minor stroke and misheard her. I brought the speaker back to my ear. Stealing his moment? Evelyn, what are you even talking about? Her voice grew louder, gaining that righteous, indignant tone she loved to deploy when she knew she was losing a logical argument. You know exactly what I mean, Liam. You always make things about yourself. You have a way of drawing attention. And this weekend needed to be entirely about Caleb. He worked so incredibly hard for his bachelor's degree. He needed to be the center of attention for once in his life. Not you. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ground together. When have I ever made anything about myself? Oh, please stop playing the victim, she snapped viciously. Remember last Thanksgiving? We were all having a perfectly nice dinner, and you just had to start bragging about your new corporate job interview. You always have to prove you're better than your brother. You can't stand it when he succeeds. I closed my eyes. The memory of that Thanksgiving dinner flashed vividly in my mind. We were sitting at the table. Uncle Marcus had looked directly at me across the turkey and explicitly asked, "So, Liam, what are you doing with your life these days?" Still pushing papers. I had given him a literal 2-sentence answer about a second-round interview I had coming up at a major consulting firm. That was it. I didn't gloat. I didn't bring it up myself. But in my mother's twisted, narcissistic reality, answering a direct question honestly was toxic, attention-seeking behavior designed to humiliate Caleb, who was unemployed at the time. Right? I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy whisper. I understand perfectly. Look, she continued, clearly feeling victorious now that I wasn't yelling back, assuming my silence was submission. It's just better this way. Caleb has had a really hard time lately, and he needed this win. He needed a day where nobody was comparing him to you. Can't you just be happy for your brother for once in your miserable life? That's fine, Mom, I said smoothly. The last, lingering shred of childhood hurt had vanished entirely, replaced by an absolute, diamond-hard clarity. I saw them for exactly who they were. I understand completely. I really do. Just do me one favor. What? She asked suspiciously, her tone guarded. Then don't expect an invite to mine. She actually laughed. It was a sharp, mocking, incredibly condescending sound that echoed terribly through the phone speaker. To yours? Liam, please. You've been rambling about taking night classes and finishing that master's degree for 2 years now with absolutely nothing to show for it. I'm not exactly holding my breath waiting for an invitation to a ceremony that's never going to happen. Have a nice Sunday. Goodbye, Evelyn, I said. I didn't wait for her to respond. I hit the red button and ended the call. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream into a pillow. I just stood up, walked over to the cheap paper calendar hanging by a thumbtack on my kitchen wall, grabbed a thick red marker, and drew a heavy, dark circle around a date exactly 3 weeks away. She thought I had nothing to show for it. She thought I was failing. Little did she know the game was about to change permanently, and she was about to be left completely in the dark. The blatant favoritism wasn't new. It was the defining architectural structure of my childhood. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was established early and enforced with brutal, unwavering consistency. Caleb was the golden child. He could do absolutely no wrong. If he broke a window playing baseball in the house, Evelyn would say he was just being an active, creative boy. If I got a B+ on an advanced calculus test instead of an A, Arthur would sit me down in his study and deliver a grueling lecture about how I was lazy, ungrateful, and destined for mediocrity. But the deepest betrayal, the one that truly severed my internal ties to them, happened when I was 18. I had spent my entire senior year of high school working a part-time job at a hardware store while maintaining a 3.9 GPA, securing acceptance into a rigorous engineering program. I sat my parents down in the living room and asked about the college fund. For years, They had vaguely, proudly mentioned to relatives that they were setting money aside in a dedicated account for our education. Arthur had crossed his arms, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Listen, Liam, you're a smart kid. You're resilient. You'll figure it out. We need to save the entire college fund for Caleb. He's more sensitive. He struggles academically. He needs more of a safety net than you do." I was 18 years old. I felt like I had been physically punched in the stomach. They weren't just refusing to help me. They were actively punishing me for being independent and capable. They had the money. They owned a lucrative rental property, a piece of prime real estate across town that generated passive income. But they refused to leverage it for me. They explicitly told me my future wasn't worth the investment. So I took out massive, crippling student loans. I worked brutal night shifts at a logistics warehouse, stacking heavy cardboard boxes from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. just to pay for my expensive textbooks and my share of rent in a rundown apartment. I scraped by on sheer, unadulterated willpower while Caleb went to an outrageously expensive private university, fully funded by my parents, where he spent 6 years partying on their dime. Over the years, I learned to stop sharing my life with them. I built a massive, impenetrable fortress around my emotions. Every single time I opened the gate and let them in, they found a way to tear down whatever I had built. When I landed my first real corporate job out of college, Arthur's immediate response was, "Don't get comfortable. Companies always fire the new guys first when the economy dips." I had stopped trying to win their approval. It was a rigged game. But my life wasn't just a battlefield at home. At work, I faced an entirely different kind of warfare. My company was highly competitive, a shark tank of ambitious corporate climbers, and I had a coworker named Julian who was the professional equivalent of my brother Caleb. Julian was smooth, wore expensive Italian suits, played golf with the senior partners, and had a nasty, well-documented habit of taking credit for my complex data models. Just last week, the tension with Julian had reached an absolute boiling point. We had a massive, high-stakes quarterly projection meeting with the CEO, a formidable, terrifyingly sharp man named Mr. Sterling. Julian had confidently volunteered to present the financial forecasting model to the executive board. The exact model I had spent 3 grueling weeks building from scratch. Julian stood at the head of the polished mahogany boardroom table, confidently clicking through my slides, soaking in the approving nods from the executives. I sat in the back row, my hands folded neatly on my lap, my blood boiling beneath my calm exterior. But I had prepared for this exact scenario. I knew Julian didn't understand the underlying mathematics. He only understood how to read a rehearsed script and look good doing it. I had intentionally left a minor, highly complex calculation error on the final projection slide. An error regarding international tax variances and fluctuating tariff rates that only the person who actually built the algorithm from the ground up would know how to spot and fix on the fly. When CEO Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, squinted at the massive screen, and pointed out the discrepancy, the room went dead silent. "Julian," Mr. Sterling said, his voice deep and demanding, "these Q4 numbers don't align with the recent European tariff shifts. Explain the variance to me. Walk me through your formula." Julian froze entirely. He stared at the screen. A visible bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He stammered, flipping back a slide, completely lost. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. I quietly cleared my throat from the back of the room. Every head turned to me. I stood up, walked calmly to the front of the boardroom, explicitly explained the complex variance, and corrected the high-level math entirely in my head, delivering the exact revised projection down to the decimal point without looking at a single note. Mr. Sterling looked at me, his eyes narrowing in intense calculation. Then he looked at Julian, who was physically shrinking into his expensive suit. Sterling didn't say a word of reprimand to Julian, but he didn't have to. The power dynamic in that room shifted permanently, definitively in my favor. "Liam," Mr. Sterling said as the meeting adjourned and the executives filed out. "Stay behind for a moment." That was when Mr. Sterling first hinted that a major executive restructuring was coming. He told me he was tired of empty suits and wanted people who actually did the heavy lifting. He told me to keep my head down and my numbers sharp. That was my life, fighting for every single inch of ground. And through it all, through the warehouse shifts, the corporate backstabbing, and the family gaslighting, I was secretly taking night classes. I was enrolled in a grueling dual master's program. I hadn't told my parents the true extent of it. They thought I was taking a few community college courses for fun. But seeing that Facebook post of Caleb's party, hearing my mother tell me I was stealing his moment, it flipped a permanent switch deep inside my brain. The fortress I had built around myself hardened into titanium. I was done being the ghost in my own family. I was done letting them dictate my worth. I was exactly 3 weeks away from a massive academic and professional achievement. And I was going to celebrate it. But I wasn't going to do it their way. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at their table anymore. I was going to build my own table, and I was going to make sure they couldn't afford the cover charge. The next morning, during my lunch break at the firm, I walked out of the glass-fronted office building, found a quiet, secluded bench in the nearby park, pulled out my phone, and called my cousin Noah. I met Noah at a loud, greasy, retro-style diner halfway between my office building and his house in the suburbs. The smell of fried bacon and stale coffee hung heavy in the air. Noah was already sitting in a corner booth when I walked in, violently shredding a paper napkin into tiny, nervous pieces. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. Noah was a genuinely good guy. We used to be thick as thieves when we were kids, riding bikes and scraping our knees, but families naturally drift apart as you get older, especially when the parents are constantly engaged in passive-aggressive cold wars over who has the better house or the smarter kids. He looked up as I slid into the cracked red vinyl booth opposite him. "Man, Liam, I am so incredibly sorry," were the very first words out of his mouth. If I had known what was actually going on, I never would have posted those pictures on Facebook. I feel like an absolute idiot. I took them down this morning. "It's not your fault, Noah," I said, waving down a tired-looking waitress and ordering a black coffee. "You didn't know. You were just celebrating. Leave the pictures up. It doesn't matter." Noah leaned forward, resting his elbows on the sticky table and lowering his voice so the neighboring booths couldn't hear. "Liam, I really didn't know. When I got to the backyard party and didn't see you there, I thought it was super weird. I went straight up to your mom and asked her where you were." I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of the scalding coffee the waitress just dropped off. "And what exactly did Evelyn say?" Noah grimaced, looking down at his hands. He looked like he was about to deliver terrible, tragic news. She told everyone there that you were invited, but you explicitly said you were too busy with your new girlfriend to bother showing up. She said you told her you thought family parties were boring and beneath you now that you had a fancy corporate job." My hands tightened into fists under the table, my fingernails biting painfully into my palms. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. They didn't just casually exclude me. They didn't just forget. They actively, maliciously assassinated my character to justify my absence. They painted me as the arrogant, villainous, ungrateful son who abandoned his family for a woman. By doing this, they secured their position as the tragic, loving parents who were suffering the rejection of a cruel child. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. "I don't have a new girlfriend, Noah," I said, my voice dangerously calm, the ice returning to my veins. "And I never received an invitation. Not in the mail, not a text, not a phone call. They purposely didn't tell me." Noah stared at me, his eyes widening in horror. "Are you serious?" "Jesus, Liam, that's sick. Why would they do that?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Aunt Clara was talking about it by the buffet. A lot of people thought it was really disrespectful of you to blow off Caleb like that. I'm so sorry I believed her." "Don't worry about it," I said, forcing my hands to unclench and rest flat on the table. "They've been spinning stories about me for years. It's how they control the narrative. But I need a favor from you. A really big one." "Anything," Noah said instantly, desperation in his eyes to make things right. Name it. I leaned in and laid out my entire plan. I told him the truth. I told him about the secret dual master's degrees in engineering and business administration. I told him about the grueling thesis defense I had coming up in less than 3 weeks with a panel of terrifying professors. And I told him that I wanted to throw a graduation party. A real one. But here is the catch, I said, pointing a rigid finger at him. I want it to be an exclusive list. No Evelyn. No Arthur. No Caleb. I only want the people who actually give a damn about me. The people who support me. No dead weight. Noah's face completely lit up. A wide, conspiratorial grin spread across his face. Oh, I am so in. Absolutely. Whatever you need. I'm your guy. I need help organizing it on the ground while I finish my research, I explained, pulling out a small notebook. Finding a premium venue, arranging high-end food, and most importantly, keeping it completely off the radar of my parents. If they find out, they will try to ruin it. They will show up and make a scene, or they will call the venue and cancel it posing as me. Leave the logistics to me, Noah said confidently. I have a buddy who manages events at the Lakeside Country Club. But you know who we need to tell first, right? We can't keep this from Grandma Beatrice. I hesitated, taking a slow, deep breath. Grandma Beatrice was an absolute force of nature. She lived alone in a massive, meticulously maintained Victorian house on the edge of the historic district. She was tough, sharp-tongued, and commanded absolute, unquestioned respect from every single person in our sprawling family tree. More importantly, Beatrice was the sole keeper of the family inheritance. She controlled a massive portfolio of commercial real estate and trusts that my grandfather had built. It was a fact my parents were hyper-aware of. Arthur and Evelyn constantly sucked up to her, bringing her lavish gifts and aggressively bragging about Caleb's mediocre accomplishments just to stay in her good graces. They treated her like a walking bank account. If she finds out they lied to her about you, Noah said, accurately reading my hesitation, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. She actually loves you, man. She asks about you all the time at family events, and your parents always cut in and change the subject to Caleb. All right, I said, tossing a $20 bill onto the table to cover the coffees. Let's go see her. The drive to Grandma Beatrice's house felt like driving toward the epicenter of a storm. When we arrived, the house smelled exactly like I remembered from childhood. Cinnamon, old paper, and expensive lemon polish. Grandma Beatrice was sitting in her high-backed reading chair near the bay window when we walked into the parlor. She wore a pristine silk blouse and her signature string of pearls. She looked up, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning us immediately. Liam, she said, her voice carrying an undeniable authority. It's a rare day you visit an old woman. Noah, close the door behind you. I sat down on the uncomfortable velvet sofa across from her. I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid it all out. I told her the truth about Caleb's party. I told her about the deliberate exclusion. And then, I told her the disgusting lie Evelyn had spun about me ignoring the family for a fake girlfriend. As I spoke, Grandma Beatrice's face didn't crumble. She didn't gasp. Her expression hardened into solid, unyielding stone. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. When I finished, the silence in the parlor was deafening. Evelyn told me you couldn't be bothered to come, Beatrice finally said, her voice dangerously quiet, which was far more terrifying than if she had screamed. She looked me dead in the eye, handed me a plate of prime rib that I paid for, and lied directly to my face. Yes, Grandma, I said softly. Beatrice slowly stood up, leaning heavily on her silver-handled cane. She walked over to her antique oak writing desk, pulled out a thick, leather-bound checkbook, and slammed it down on the wood with a sharp crack. You are going to have the finest graduation party this family has ever seen, she announced, turning to glare at me with a fierce, protective fire in her eyes. You will book the country club. You will hire a real caterer. Not that cheap barbecue nonsense Evelyn tries to pass off as gourmet. And I am paying for every single cent of it. "Grandma, you don't have to do that." I started, reaching out. "I have some savings." "I will not be argued with, Liam," she snapped. Her eyes were bright with a mix of fury and unshed tears. "They have treated you like an afterthought for 28 years. I watched them do it and I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I thought Arthur would eventually grow up. I was wrong. Well, to hell with the peace. It ends now. We are going to show them exactly what happens when you discard the best asset this family has." The wheels were instantly in motion. Noah went into full event planner mode, executing tasks with military precision. We quietly invited Aunt Clara, who was absolutely mortified and broke down in tears when Grandma Beatrice called her directly and informed her of the truth. We invited a few other supportive cousins, my close friends from undergrad, and a select few trusted colleagues from the firm. But large, sprawling families inevitably have leaks. It's the nature of the beast. Uncle Marcus, the resident family gossip who always loved stirring the pot, had stopped by Noah's house unannounced a few days later to borrow a power drill. Marcus was the kind of man who thrived on drama. He was still bitter about his own costly divorce years ago, and misery loves company. He was walking past Noah's open kitchen window when he overheard Noah on the phone, aggressively confirming the premium catering order and custom ice sculpture under the name Liam's Graduation Gala. Noah called me 10 minutes later in an absolute, hyperventilating panic. "Marcus heard me," Noah stammered into the phone. "I saw him outside the window grinning like a maniac. He knows you're throwing a secret party. He's gonna tell your parents. Liam, the surprise is entirely ruined. We need to cancel." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in my office, looking down at the crawling city traffic below, and I just smiled into the phone. A slow, highly calculated smile. "Let him try, Noah," I said calmly. "Just let him." I knew Uncle Marcus intimately. He was arrogant, malicious, and desperately loved to ruin a good thing to feel important. But he was also incredibly disorganized, terrible with details, and functionally an idiot. I had a strong feeling his interference wouldn't go exactly the way he planned. And I was right. Marcus had fully intended to call Evelyn immediately and ruin the surprise, hoping to start a massive, explosive family fight that he could sit back and watch with popcorn. But, in his breathless excitement to be the bearer of bad news, his atrocious listening skills failed him. He had overheard the day of the week, but he got the month completely wrong. He thought my party was scheduled for 4 weeks away, not the upcoming weekend. In his twisted, dramatic mind, Marcus decided to wait and drop the nuclear bomb on my parents the exact day before he thought the party was happening, calculating that it would cause maximum logistical chaos and emotional damage. His sheer, staggering incompetence became my absolute greatest shield. My parents remained entirely, blissfully ignorant, believing they had successfully crushed me. The next 3 weeks were an absolute blur of adrenaline, black coffee, and sheer, punishing exhaustion. I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, balancing my heavy corporate workload with finalizing the massive, complex data models required for my thesis defense. I felt like a wire pulled impossibly tight, ready to snap at the slightest touch. But the thought of that upcoming Saturday, the thought of standing under that banner, kept me moving forward. The day of my thesis defense finally arrived. I stood in a sterile, fluorescent-lit, wood-paneled conference room at the university. My suit was pressed. My tie was perfectly straight. My heart was beating a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. In front of me sat a panel of 5 formidable professors, including my primary advisor, Professor Vance. Professor Vance was a giant in the tech and business industry. He was a man whose single letter of recommendation or phone call could bypass HR departments and open doors at any Fortune 500 company on the continent. He was notoriously strict, rarely smiled, and almost never handed out compliments. I didn't use flashcards. I didn't read off a script. I didn't need to. I had lived, breathed, and bled this research for 2 solid years. For 45 uninterrupted minutes, I walked them through the complex integration of predictive engineering algorithms with corporate financial forecasting. I dismantled their theoretical challenges. I answered their rapid-fire, aggressive questions without missing a single beat. I owned every square inch of that room. I wasn't a student defending a paper. I was an expert educating a room. When I finally clicked to the last slide, turned off the projector, and finished my presentation, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. The professors exchanged unreadable looks. Then Professor Vance slowly closed his thick leather folder. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses, set them on the desk, and looked up at me. He smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a genuine, warm, deeply impressed smile. "Mr. Liam," Professor Vance said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "I have sat on these defense panels for over 25 years. I have seen hundreds of ambitious projects. I have seen students crack under pressure. That is, without a doubt, the most commercially viable, intellectually rigorous, and brilliant thesis I have ever reviewed. Congratulations." He stood up and extended his hand across the table. "You pass with the highest possible honors. The industry is lucky to have you." I shook his hand. I walked out of that university building, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, and felt like a 10-ton weight had been physically severed from my chest. I had done it. Against all the odds, against my parents' doubts, against Arthur's financial sabotage, against Evelyn's gaslighting. I had succeeded. But the academic victory was only the very beginning. The real shock, the professional earthquake that would give me the ultimate leverage to crush my family's toxic empire, was coming the very next morning at my office. The trap was fully set. All I had to do now was let the night unfold, and wait for the morning news to break. The real shock came the very next morning at my corporate office. I was sitting at my cubicle, typing up a routine email, when CEO Sterling's executive assistant walked over, tapped me on the shoulder, and quietly told me I was needed in the top-floor suite immediately. I walked into the massive, glass-walled corner office overlooking the city. Mr. Sterling was sitting behind his sweeping, custom oak desk. Seated next to him was our lead corporate lawyer, a sharp, intimidating woman holding a thick, legally bound folder. My heart started hammering against my ribs. For a split second, my ingrained childhood trauma flared up. I wondered if Julian had lied about me again. I wondered if I was being fired. "Liam, sit down," Mr. Sterling said, gesturing to the heavy leather chair opposite him. He did not believe in small talk. "Your performance over the last 6 months, specifically how you handled the Q4 projection crisis with Julian, has not gone unnoticed by the executive board. You showed grace under pressure, and you demonstrated undeniable, irreplaceable competence." I nodded slowly, gripping the armrests of the chair to keep my hands from shaking. "I also took the liberty of speaking with Professor Vance at the university yesterday evening," Mr. Sterling continued, leaning forward and folding his hands on the desk. "We run in the exact same circles. He sits on the advisory board for one of our largest tech clients. He told me about your thesis defense. He called you a generational talent." My eyes widened. I hadn't anticipated that connection. "We are fundamentally restructuring the executive board," Mr. Sterling said, his tone dead serious. "I do not want you wasting your talent as a senior analyst anymore. I want you at the top. I am officially offering you the position of senior consulting partner. It comes with firm equity, your own corner office, and a base salary that will roughly triple what you are making right now." The corporate lawyer silently slid the heavy folder across the polished desk. I opened it and stared at the numbers printed cleanly on page 2. The salary made my head spin. It was an obscene amount of money. It was more money than my father, Arthur, made in 3 entire years combined. It was the kind of financial security that fundamentally alters the trajectory of a person's life. It meant I would never again have to worry about student loan payments, rent increases, or surviving on cheap noodles. It was absolute freedom. I signed the contract with a firm hand. The lawyer smiled and took the paperwork back. Mr. Sterling shook my hand and told me my new office would be ready by Monday. I left the building that afternoon feeling like a completely different human being. The transformation was complete. The boy who was denied a college fund was dead. The man who had built his own empire out of the scraps his family threw away had officially arrived. The venue for my secret graduation gala was completely set. Grandma Beatrice had spared absolutely no expense. She had rented out the most beautiful, high-end banquet hall at the Lakeside Country Club. There were elegant string lights draped from the vaulted ceiling, heavy white linen tablecloths, tall crystal centerpieces, and a massive, professionally printed banner strung across the back wall that read, Liam, Master of Engineering and Master of Business Administration. Everything was flawless. The night of the party fell on a crisp, clear Saturday. The sunset was painting the sky over the lake in brilliant shades of orange and deep purple. I stood near the entrance of the banquet hall wearing a brand-new, tailored charcoal gray suit I had bought that morning to celebrate my massive corporate promotion. I felt powerful. I watched as my real family, the family of my choosing, began to arrive. Noah was the very first one there, bursting through the heavy oak double doors, slapping me hard on the back, and handing me a glass of incredibly expensive whiskey. Then came Aunt Clara. She walked up to me, her eyes already welling with tears, and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. She whispered frantic, desperate apologies into my shoulder for ever believing the toxic lies my mother had spread about me having a fake girlfriend. I told her to forget it entirely, that tonight was only about looking forward, not backward. Then Grandma Beatrice arrived. When she walked through those doors, leaning heavily on her silver cane, the entire room naturally quieted down out of deep, ingrained respect. She wore a sharp navy blazer and her signature pearls. She walked straight up to me, bypassed the hug, looked up at the massive banner bearing my name, and nodded once. "You did well, boy," she said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "You did very well. Now show them exactly what they missed." By 7 o'clock, the room was packed with 50 people. Cousins who had flown under my parents' radar, friends from my grueling undergrad days who had seen me study until 3 in the morning after my warehouse shifts, and trusted colleagues from the firm. Around 8 o'clock, a sleek, jet-black Porsche pulled up to the valet stand right outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hall. A hush fell over my college friends as Professor Vance stepped out of the luxury car. He actually showed up. He walked into the hall looking sharp in a tailored jacket, shook my hand warmly, and immediately asked Noah for a microphone. Professor Vance didn't just give a generic, polite toast. He gave a speech that commanded the absolute attention of the room. He told the entire crowd about the extreme complexity of my research, how I had grinded through the dual program while holding down a demanding corporate job without ever complaining, and how proud the university was to call me an alumnus. He called me a rare, brilliant mind. People cheered loudly. Grandma Beatrice looked like she was ready to physically fight anyone who didn't clap loud enough. Then Noah, acting as the unofficial hype man of the night, gathered everyone together under the banner. "All right, everyone, group photo. Get up here." We all squeezed together. I stood right in the dead center. Grandma Beatrice anchored my left side, leaning on her cane and beaming with pride. Professor Vance stood on my right. Noah set his phone on a tall tripod, hit the 10-second timer, and sprinted into the frame. The flash went off, capturing the absolute best moment of my life. Before the night was even over, Noah posted the photo to his social media. He explicitly tagged me, Aunt Clara, and half the family tree. His caption was simple but devastatingly effective. "Celebrating the hardest working guy I know. 2 master's degrees and a massive corporate promotion to senior partner. No fake girlfriends here, just real success. We are so proud of you, Liam." But Noah's post wasn't the nuclear bomb. It was just the warning siren. The true detonation was coming in the morning. I went to sleep that night knowing that my parents' carefully constructed reality was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I slept better than I had in a decade. The nuclear bomb dropped at exactly 6 o'clock on Sunday morning. Professor Vance had deep, influential industry connections. He had pitched the story of my thesis research and my rapid corporate ascent to a prominent local journalist named Dylan, who covered business, tech, and local success stories. Dylan had interviewed me briefly over the phone a few days prior, asking about my background and my recent promotion, but I had absolutely no idea when the article would actually run. It ran on Sunday morning. Front page of the local digital newspaper, shared heavily across all local business networks, community pages, and suburban neighborhood groups. The headline read, "Local prodigy Liam revolutionizes tech forecasting, secures senior partner role at 28. The article was incredibly, meticulously detailed. It included a professional corporate headshot of me, mentioned both of my newly acquired, highly difficult degrees, and explicitly detailed my high-profile promotion at the firm. It even estimated the massive salary bracket for that tier of partnership, highlighting my rapid, unprecedented rise from a working-class background without family financial support. It was a glowing, indisputable, highly public record of my success. It was the ultimate validation. I woke up at 8 o'clock in my apartment. My phone was vibrating so violently it was physically sliding across the smooth wood of my nightstand. I reached out, grabbed it, and looked at the screen. 32 missed calls. 20 of them were from my mother, Evelyn. 10 were from my father, Arthur. 2 were from Caleb. My text messages were an absolute, chaotic war zone. I opened the first barrage from Evelyn. Sent at 6:45 a.m. Liam, what is this? What is Noah's post? Why is Grandma Beatrice there? Sent at 7:15 a.m. Answer your phone right now. Aunt Clara won't return my calls. Marcus is saying you lied to us. Sent at 7:45 a.m. I just saw the news article online. Liam, how could you do this to us? I am having heart palpitations. Your father is furious. I sat up in bed, poured myself a glass of water from the carafe, and smiled a cold, completely satisfied smile. The grand illusion was shattered. They were entirely exposed to the family, to the community, and to themselves. Their narrative of the lazy, ungrateful son who abandoned them for a fake girlfriend was dead and buried. I took a deep breath, unlocked my phone screen, and decided it was finally time to stop ignoring them. I wanted to hear it. I dialed Evelyn's number. She answered on the very first ring. Liam! She practically screamed into the receiver. She sounded entirely hysterical, her breathing ragged, loud, and incredibly dramatic. How could you lie to us like this? How could you have a massive, expensive party and not invite your own mother? I leaned back against my pillows, staring up at the ceiling. The panic in her voice didn't move me at all. I felt absolutely nothing but clinical detachment. I didn't lie, Evelyn. I just didn't tell you. There is a very distinct, important difference. A difference? She sobbed loudly. It was her classic, textbook manipulation tactic. Cry hard enough, act like the wounded victim, and the other person will eventually apologize just to make the noise stop. I saw the article, Liam. You're a senior partner. You have 2 master's degrees. The article says you're making a fortune. Why didn't you tell us? We had to find out from the morning news. Aunt Clara called me and yelled at me. She called me a horrible mother. Aunt Clara is a very smart woman, I said calmly. She calls it exactly like she sees it. I thought I was having a heart attack, Liam. I collapsed on the kitchen floor, she wailed. How could you maliciously exclude us from such a huge milestone in your life? Evelyn, stop. My voice wasn't loud, but it was laced with so much cold, terrifying authority that it cut through her fake crying like a razor blade. She hitched her breath, visibly startled into silence by my tone. I had never, ever spoken to her like that in my entire life. Do you remember our phone conversation exactly a month ago? I asked, my voice steady, precise, and unyielding. When I called you about Caleb's graduation party? Dead silence on the other end of the line. You explicitly told me you didn't want me stealing his moment, I reminded her. Every single word felt like dropping a heavy stone onto a fragile glass table. You laughed at me when I mentioned my own graduation. You told me I made everything about myself. You told me I was rambling about degrees I would never finish. You told me not to expect an invite to Caleb's party, so I told you not to expect one to mine. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered. her voice shaking violently now that her own cruel words were weaponized directly against her. I was stressed. Planning a party is hard. You're taking it too personally. Were you too stressed to invite me? Or was stress the reason you looked Grandma Beatrice in the eye and told her I was skipping family events to hang out with a fake girlfriend? Did stress make you assassinate my character to our entire extended family? A sharp, terrified gasp echoed through the phone. She realized I knew everything. The lie was exposed. The curtain was pulled back. She had absolutely no defense left. "Give me the damn phone!" I heard Arthur's voice booming violently in the background. A second later, the line fumbled, and my father was on the line. "Listen to me, you disrespectful little punk," Arthur growled. His voice was vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. He hated losing control more than anything in the world. "You are tearing this family apart over nothing. You're being dramatic and vindictive. You think making some money and getting your name in the paper makes you a big shot? You owe us an apology right now. Or you can forget about coming home for Thanksgiving." "I don't owe you a damn thing," I shot back, sitting up straight in bed. The years of intimidation washed off me in an instant. He had absolutely no power over me anymore. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being consistent. You made it explicitly clear for 28 years that my achievements didn't matter. You told me I was wasting my time. You gave my college fund to Caleb so he could go party for 6 years. So I celebrated my massive success with people who actually care. We are your parents," he yelled, his voice cracking. "We sacrificed everything for you. We put a roof over your head. You are selfish and ungrateful. You sacrificed for Caleb?" I corrected him, my voice turning to absolute ice. "I paid my own way through everything. I survived in spite of you, Arthur. Not because of you. Have a nice life. Don't ever call me again." I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit end call. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I went into my phone settings, found both of their contact names, and hit block. A few minutes later, a text message popped up on my screen from Caleb. "You are such a piece of trash. You ruined my graduation month. Now everyone on Facebook is comparing my degree to yours and making me look like an absolute idiot. You always have to ruin my life just to make yourself look good." I stared at his text for a long moment. It was pathetic. He didn't care about my success. He didn't say congratulations. He only cared that my light made his shadow look bigger. He was exactly the entitled person my parents had trained him to be. I didn't even bother typing a reply. I just hit block on his number, too. The storm was over. The apartment was perfectly quiet. For the first time in my entire 28 years of existence, I didn't feel the desperate, clawing need to chase their validation. I put my phone down on the nightstand, got out of bed, and walked into the kitchen to start a fresh pot of coffee. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. Felt like absolute peace. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. November arrived with a bitter, biting chill, bringing the Thanksgiving holiday with it. For the first time in my life, I did not drive down the interstate to sit at my parents' dining room table. I did not eat dry turkey while listening to Arthur brag about Caleb's mediocre accomplishments while completely ignoring my presence. Instead, I drove my new car to Grandma Beatrice's Victorian house. The scene was entirely different. The house was warm, smelling of roasted garlic, fresh herbs, and baking pies. Noah was in the kitchen loudly arguing with Aunt Clara about the correct way to mash potatoes. A fire was roaring in the massive stone fireplace. My parents and Caleb were noticeably absent. Grandma Beatrice had made a few highly strategic phone calls the week prior. She had explicitly uninvited Arthur and Evelyn. When Uncle Marcus tried to protest, claiming she was tearing the family apart, Beatrice calmly informed him that if he had a problem with her guest list, He was more than welcome to stay home and eat a microwave dinner. Marcus, absolutely terrified of losing his standing regarding her real estate inheritance, shut his mouth instantly and didn't mention it again. When we all finally sat down at the massive mahogany dining table, Grandma Beatrice tapped her crystal water glass with a silver spoon. The room went silent. She stood up slowly, looking around the table, her eyes finally resting on me. "We have a lot to be thankful for this year," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I am specifically thankful for the truth. For too long, certain people in this family have been allowed to control the narrative, to play favorites, and to diminish the hard work of others to hide their own failures." She paused, taking a sip of water. Uncle Marcus looked down at his plate, sweating slightly. "I have recently spoken with my lawyer," Grandma Beatrice continued casually, though the words carried the weight of a tactical airstrike, "and I have fundamentally restructured my estate, my trusts, and my inheritance plans. The details are private, but let me make one thing abundantly clear. This family will no longer reward laziness, manipulation, or cruelty. We will reward integrity. We will reward hard work. Liam, please pass the cranberry sauce." Noah kicked me under the table and shot me a massive grin. Aunt Clara smiled warmly. The dynamic of the entire extended family had shifted permanently. The toxic reign of my parents was officially over. But toxic families do not just disappear quietly into the night. They retreat, they regroup, and they look for a new angle of attack. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. I was sitting in my living room wearing sweatpants, reviewing a lucrative contract for a new client. The rain was lashing against the window panes. Then, a heavy, sharp knock echoed from my front door. I frowned. My building required a security fob for entry, meaning whoever was at the door had piggybacked behind a resident. I walked over and peered through the brass peephole. My stomach gave a brief, involuntary jolt. Standing in the fluorescent light of the hallway were my parents, Arthur and Evelyn. They looked terrible. Evelyn's hair was frizzy from the damp air, her eyes red-rimmed. Arthur looked pale, his jaw set tightly. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, blocking the entrance with my body. "Liam," Evelyn breathed out, her voice trembling instantly. She took a half-step forward, reaching out. "We need to talk to you. Please just give us 10 minutes. We came to apologize. We realized we made horrible mistakes." I stared at them. "You have 5 minutes. Speak." Arthur cleared his throat, trying to summon back his old patriarchal authority, but failing miserably. "We want to fix things, son. Family is the most important thing in the world. We need to stick together, especially when times get tough." "Times aren't tough for me, Arthur," I said coldly. "They are tough for Caleb," my father blurted out. The room went dead silent. A cold, cynical smile spread across my face. Suddenly, the entire picture snapped into crystal clear focus. "Caleb lost his job last week," Arthur pushed forward. "He's struggling, Liam. He's got rent to pay, car payments, and he is spiraling. We know about your promotion. Oliver told us." There it was, the final, disgusting puzzle piece. My cousin Oliver. Oliver had attended my party, drank my whiskey, and then immediately went behind my back to leak my private financial information to my parents. "Oliver told us the exact salary you're pulling in now as a senior partner," Arthur continued desperately. "You have real power at that firm now. You have the authority to hire people. You could get Caleb an entry-level management job with one phone call. You owe us." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. They didn't come to apologize because they felt guilty. They came because they realized I had achieved massive financial power, and they immediately wanted to harvest that power for their golden child. "Let me get this perfectly straight," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You exclude me from a family milestone. You lie to Grandma Beatrice about me. You tell me I am stealing Caleb's moment. And months later, you break into my apartment building, fake an apology, and demand I use my hard-earned executive position to hand Caleb a high-paying corporate job that he is entirely unqualified for. He is your brother, Evelyn cried. Family helps family. You are not my family, I said, stepping toward them, forcing Arthur to take a step back into the hallway. You sacrificed me for 28 years to build Caleb up. And the second he fails, you come crawling to me, demanding I fix him. Absolutely not. You are being incredibly selfish, Arthur yelled, his true colors instantly resurfacing. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I roared, pointing a finger directly at his chest. I built this life with my own bare hands. I survived your emotional abuse. I survived you draining the college fund. I am officially done. Get out of my sight. Do not call me. And if you ever show up at my building again, I will have my corporate lawyer file a lawsuit and a restraining order for harassment. I have the resources to ruin you legally, Arthur. Do not test me. I grabbed the heavy wooden door, slammed it shut in their faces, flipped the deadbolt, and fastened the chain. I stood in the entryway, listening to the muffled sound of Evelyn crying as the elevator doors closed. The infection had finally been completely cut out. By late December, the city was covered in a thick blanket of white snow. Christmas was only a few days away. I had taken a rare afternoon off from the firm to run some errands and buy premium groceries for a holiday dinner I was hosting for my friends and colleagues. I was walking down the brightly lit produce aisle of a high-end grocery store downtown, tossing organic vegetables into my cart, when I turned the corner and froze completely. Standing near the citrus display was my mother. She looked entirely out of place in this expensive part of town. She was wearing a faded winter coat, staring blankly at a pyramid of oranges. I noticed instantly that she had aged 5 years in the span of a few months. The arrogant, vibrant, controlling energy she always carried herself with was completely gone. Her shoulders were slumped under the heavy weight of consequences she had never, ever believed she would actually have to face. Grandma Beatrice cutting them off had clearly taken a massive financial and emotional toll. I stood there for a moment, contemplating turning my cart around and walking down the next aisle to avoid her entirely. But I didn't. I didn't need to hide anymore. I walked forward, my cart wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor. She looked up at the sound. Her eyes widened, and she visibly gasped when she saw me. Liam, she breathed out. Hello, Evelyn, I said politely. Not Mom, just Evelyn. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she held a plastic produce bag. She didn't launch into a hysterical crying fit this time. There was no audience. There was no Arthur to back her up. There was just the cold, hard reality of a son who was now a complete and utter stranger to her. You look well, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted over my expensive wool overcoat and the premium groceries in my cart. I am, I replied simply. We stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the grocery store, surrounded by cheerful holiday music playing through the overhead speakers. The silence between us stretched out, filled with decades of unsaid words, broken promises, and irreversible damage. She looked down at her shoes, then back up at me. Her eyes were shiny with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Are you coming to the house for Christmas dinner? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. No, I said. I'm hosting my own dinner. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected the blow, but it still physically hurt to receive it. She twisted the plastic bag in her hands. I see. She hesitated, taking a shaky breath. Liam, are you happy? It was such an incredibly unexpected, raw question that I didn't have a pre-planned answer ready for it. I stood there looking at the woman who had brought me into the world but had never truly nurtured me. I thought about the absolute peace in my quiet apartment. I thought about the deep respect I commanded in corporate boardrooms. I thought about Grandma Beatrice's fierce loyalty, Noah's genuine friendship, and the beautiful, secure life I had built entirely on my own terms. I looked her directly in the eyes. Yes, I said firmly. I am happier than I have been in my entire life. She stared at me for a long second. Then she offered a small, deeply sad, but genuinely defeated smile. She finally understood. She realized that my happiness was not dependent on her approval. In fact, my happiness had only truly blossomed the exact moment I stopped seeking it. "That is all I wanted," she whispered, a blatant lie to comfort herself in the face of her own failure as a mother. "Goodbye, Evelyn," I said. I didn't wait for her response. I pushed my cart past her and continued walking down the aisle. I didn't look back. I walked out into the freezing winter air, loaded my groceries into my car, and drove back to the incredible life I had built. If there is one absolute, undeniable truth I have learned from walking away from my own bloodline, it is this: you cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick. We are heavily conditioned by society to believe that family is an unbreakable, sacred bond. We are taught that you owe your parents your endless loyalty simply because they gave you life. But that is a dangerous, toxic myth. Loyalty is a two-way street, and respect must be earned, regardless of shared DNA. When people constantly minimize your achievements, when they deliberately exclude you, when they treat your presence as a burden and your success as a threat, they are actively showing you exactly who they are. Believe them the very first time. Walking away from toxic family members is not an act of revenge. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It hurts. It is terrifying to step out into the unknown without a safety net. But the moment you stop setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm, you will finally realize how much incredible power you actually possess. You have the absolute right to build your own table, and you have the right to choose exactly who gets a seat at it. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong and protect your peace.